Hey guys, SGT here, and I'm thrilled to have back on the line Jeff Nielson from bullionbullscanada.com. Jeff is extremely well informed about the precious metals market, and we have a lot to discuss. So Jeff, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be back here again.
The first thing I wanted to mention to you was this J.P. Morgan Financial Times article. The Financial Times wrote, and I quote, J.P. Morgan has quietly reduced a large position in the U.S. silver futures market, which had been at the center of a controversy about its impact on global prices for the precious metal. I think the language used there, had been, is kind of entertaining. Jeff, what's your take on that?
I don't tend to place a lot of faith in these sorts of reports because, the Financial Times clearly is a media source that's very friendly to J.P. Morgan and, much more likely to be, planting information rather than providing embarrassing revelations about them. So, this could be more hype just to try to influence the CFTC in their investigation more than actual substance.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think the language had been. I think it's just a bit of a comical veiled attempt at trying to say, hey, nothing to see here, guys. They've already taken care of their shorts problem. Move on.
Yeah, true. First they say that nothing's happening, and then later on they say, well, something was happening, but it's not happening any longer.
Now, in your latest piece, Shock and Awe in Precious Metals over at Bullion Bulls Canada, you mentioned that despite the most recent ambush of silver and gold prices by the banksters, investors were not immobilized by fear. What you concluded had happened was investors have finally gotten to the point where now they're saying to themselves, gold and silver are on sale. This is a paramount change in thinking for gold and silver investors, isn't it, Jeff?
Most definitely. For many years in this bull market, any time the technicals turn negative, there would be this enormous rise in fear among investors, even those, who only weeks earlier had been ardent bulls. And, obviously a large amount of this is due to the never-ending stream of anti-gold propaganda, which emanates from the mainstream media, and, of course, continually plants that seed of fear. But, as you were remarking, this is definitely a total reversal in attitude. And, basically what we seem to be seeing amongst the general public and certainly amongst the big buyers that are driving the market is kind of a who's afraid of the big bad wolf reaction. The
takeaway here is that this shock and awe that was caused by the bankers, okay, you wrote that they caused the shock, okay, by criminally trying to take down silver, $3, $4, $5, bringing it down to close to 25 an ounce. But they also were the victims of the awe because what they essentially had to do, Jeff, was sacrifice their own physical at lower prices. The buyers aren't going away.
And this is what these bankers still cannot comprehend, the basic fundamentals of supply and demand. It's a basic fact of life with, our capitalist system that when prices go down, this stimulates demand. And so, when you deliberately drive prices down, what you're doing is, deliberately and aggressively stimulating demand. And in the case of silver, where we know inventories are dwindling, this is nothing less than a suicidal strategy. And of course, what has allowed this to continue in this manner for so long is that, going back, 20 years or so, when the bankers had these vast stockpiles of bullion to dump onto the market, they could essentially trample the fundamentals. They would push prices down, and then when, fundamentally oriented buyers would step in to buy, they would dump even more bullion onto the market and keep dumping until there was total capitulation. And of course, that tactic is no longer open to them because they lack the stockpiles of bullion to do it. So now they're starting off on the same strategies, but basically they lack the muscle to finish.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me of pick your favorite comical movie in which the bad guy is he's holding a hostage and he's got the gun pointed at his own head and he says, "Stay away or I'll shoot."
Well, the example I used in a previous commentary which I titled the silly silver manipulators was to compare them to Wile E. Coyote. And it really is becoming comical because obviously the worst thing you can do if you're worried about running out of inventory is to encourage more buying. And yet this is, they're a one-trick pony that only knows one response when the market isn't going in the direction they think it should. And so they continue on this suicidal strategy which can only result in their own demise even more rapidly.
Yeah, and that leads us to, December being a delivery month on the comics. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, despite, vigorously shaking the tree, we see that with December being a delivery month, buyers are standing strong and appear to still want delivery of physical silver. And I think you wrote in that same article that amount equals nearly 3/4 of all available silver in COMEX inventories. Is that accurate? And also, does this mean that we're about to see some amazing fireworks take place in the next couple of weeks?
Well, those are the numbers, that I've basically gleaned from the, veteran traders who I tend to look to in this market. And so, whether it's slightly more than 75%, slightly less, not especially important. It's definitely a significant majority of what remains available, for sale as of today. Now, I don't necessarily think that, we're coming to the, crucial failure to deliver moment immediately, because what we saw basically going back a year ago in the London gold market is when there were similar issues with not necessarily being able to satisfy all the demand for physical bullion, there were widespread rumors that the bullion banks were quietly buying off these buyers through offering them a large paper premium to take a cash settlement instead of the bullion. And for one thing, this actually amounts to a technical default. So, while it wasn't reported in that manner, that's really what these events represent. But, be that as it may, they were able to buy off the buyers and avoid that default moment in the gold market. So, we've heard rumors that similar things are taking place with silver right now, and of course that wouldn't be a surprise because, the bankers, of course, have unlimited amounts of their paper to throw around. But, once again, this is nothing more than, kicking the can down the road and setting themselves up for an even bigger fall. Because you simply have to put yourself into the heads of these buyers who were requesting delivery of silver and are now taking, their paper bribes in order not to stand for delivery right now. Obviously, what these buyers are going to do is they're going to take that big wad of paper that the bankers give them, head right back to the COMEX and plunk it down on the next month's contract for silver and load up even more. And, so this, of course, isn't a strategy for avoiding, defeat and default and catastrophe, but rather, as with so much else of what they do, it's simply setting themselves up for an even bigger fall in the near future.
Yeah, it's ensuring that the default will eventually arrive.
Well, yeah, it's just another way of leveraging themselves even more severely, when they were already so ridiculously over-leveraged that, this is likely going to be a bankruptcy event for J.P. Morgan.
Right. What's interesting, Jeff? I think that the people that visit bullionbullscanada.com, the people that watch, the videos I put out on my channel, we are probably, less than 1% of the population. Well, clearly less than 1% of the population. But the folks that are actually informed about this, these are the people that understand the magician's trick. And the magic no longer works. The men behind the curtain have been revealed, and that's why their paper games can't save them. And I'm just fascinated by that.
And yet, at the same time, unknowingly and, of course, unwillingly, these manipulators are playing a positive role in the bullion market. The one fear that a lot of people have that have been around for a while, people such as Jim Sinclair, is that, the market will erupt into some sort of mania too soon, because it's certainly not productive or helpful for anybody, for bullion prices to simply run away into the stratosphere so that, the general public can't buy, markets themselves get totally disrupted. And of course, if there is some, utterly ridiculous short-term spike, inevitably there is a reaction, and inevitably there will be a plunge downward afterwards. And, there's already plenty of volatility in this market. We don't want or need any more. And so when the bullion banks and their allies continually put out this anti-gold and anti-silver propaganda to continually, keep that element of fear alive in the minds of most of the general public, what they're doing is, of course, as you say, they're keeping away the vast majority of buyers, but they're also keeping the market from getting overheated in any particular moment in time. And that's very positive over the long term for those of us that are already in this market.
This concludes Part 1. Click here for Part 2, Bernanke, Lies in Mining Stocks.